All right, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be doing a front brake job on a Ford Fiesta ST specifically, although it's a very similar process for just the regular Ford Fiesta. This is a Mark 6 Fiesta. It's a 2016 model. So 2008 to 2016, I believe, is Mark 6. 2017 and newer is Mark 7, although in the US, the Mark 6 was the last ST that we got, although in other parts of the world you may have an Mark 7. Either way, it's a very similar process, so this should work. But if you do have a newer Mark 7, you may want to check out a video specifically on that. This will work for the Mark 6. So in terms of tools, in terms of special tools, all you're going to need is a brake caliper spreader tool, such as this. These are very cheap. This one I think is about $11 or $12 on Amazon. It's lasted me for quite a few years. I'll put a link for it down below. So you need one of these. You're going to want some Loctite. I have both the red and the blue here. You definitely want the red high strength one for the caliper bolts, for the bracket bolts, if you are going to be replacing the rotors. So make sure you get some of that. You might want some brake parts lubricant if the brake pads that you buy doesn't come with it, so it's a good idea to have some on hand. You're gonna want some sockets as well as a ratchet to go along. Specifically, we're just gonna be needing a 13 and a 15, and then whatever you need to get your lug nuts off. Having some open-ended wrenches like this or combination wrenches is also a good idea because these can be helpful for getting those kind of harder bolts off. It's a little bit of a smaller tool, and then you can use a mallet or a hammer to kind of get some extra purchase on them if need be. And finally, what I found is that in order to hold, and I'll show you this in a second, to hold one of the sort of bolts still while you undo the nut on the end, you may want a really thin wrench if these are on the thicker side for you. So you are gonna need a 17 on the front, and I found that the 17 I have from this set is a little bit too thick, so you could grind one down if you want, but these are actually cone wrenches used for bicycles. They're pretty cheap. This is a combination one that has all the different sizes. If you have one of these laying around, it'll work. If you have a thin wrench or like a crow's foot maybe, that could work, or a thin adjustable wrench that could work as well too, but this is what I used and it worked out for me. And then obviously for lifting your car up, you're gonna want some sort of jack stand. You're gonna need a jack to lift up the car and then some wheel chocks as well, okay? So first thing we need to do is jack up the car, and then let me show you how to replace both the pads and the rotors on the front. All right, so I've got the car jacked up now. I did both the front and the rear because I'm gonna be doing both the front and the rear brakes today. But if you're only doing the front or the rear, you could just jack up that one corner. Just make sure you have all the other wheels chalked off properly to make sure you're safe. Give it a good little push. Make sure that the car is not going anywhere. Right, you're not gonna be fully under the car, but still, you wanna be as careful as you can be when you're operating near a lifted car. And what I'm gonna do actually is once I get the wheels off, I'm gonna actually slide them underneath the car to give myself just another added layer of protection because you can never be too safe. And one more quick note, if you don't have an impact driver or impact wrench sort of thing, you're gonna want to loosen up the lug nuts before you lift the car. I do have one, so I'm gonna just go ahead and zip them off right now, but you may wanna do that before you lift the car if you don't have an impact driver handy. Now, when you're working on brakes, it also is a good idea to just loosen up your brake fluid reservoir, just because as you retract the piston, as you can see, it might push some fluid up, and you don't want to essentially pressurize the system, have it spill over. So I have a little rag here just in case some spills over, and you can see a little bit did, but it's not a bad idea just to loosen this up so that, any air or fluid that needs to move can move. So the first thing we're gonna do here is we're gonna remove the caliper out of here, which is going to actually allow us to change out the brake pads. And so if you're only doing the brake pads, all you need to do is this next step. So we've got a 13 millimeter back here. Okay, there's one up here, and then there's another one down here. Okay, so you can tell because it's the ones that have these sort of rubber boots here. This is what holds the caliper slide pin. So because these are gonna be on here pretty tight, what you may want to do is use a mallet such as this and just sort of use that to kind of get them loose. And then once you get them started, then you can get a ratchet on here. So that one's loose. Okay, so the next thing you'll notice is that this sort of nut right here, or whatever you want to call it, you have to sort of hold this, otherwise you're not going to be able to actually loosen off that bolt from the rear. So what works is you need a 17 millimeter, and it needs to be somewhat thin because a regular size wrench just won't fit in there between the two things. So if you have something thin like this, like I said, this is a bicycle cone wrench, you don't really need to put a lot of force in this. This will work just fine. If you have a thinner, you know, combo wrench, that'll work too. Thin vice grips, just something to hold this part right here. And so once you get something on there, you can loosen the bolt the rest of the way and remove it, and there you go. And as you can see here, this has some blue medium strength Loctite on it, so we're going to make sure to put some back on it when we reinstall. And then just repeat on the bottom one. Okay, and now that our caliper is loose, we can just sort of wiggle it out of the way here, and as you can see, the brake pads should remain in place over here. And what we don't want to do is just let this hang by the brake line, because that could put some stress on it. So what I like to do is take an old close hanger like this. This is one that sort of has like a little like plastic coating on it. It makes it a little bit more even scratch proof, essentially. And we can just use this. You can also just use string or anything, really, bungee cord. I like this. And then just find somewhere on the strut to tie it off to, out of the way. And then all you gotta do with this is just twist it a few times, which is why I like it. It makes it really easy to put it on and off. And there we go. That's out of the way here. It's not going to hang and put any stress on the brake line here. We can work on the pads and the bracket without this out in the way. And then when we need to, we just loosen it up and we're good to go. Okay, so now we can turn our attention to the brake pads here and the bracket that mounts the caliper. So these should just sort of pull off if you just wiggle them a bit. Again, I do live in California, so not a lot of rust here. And these actually still have a decent amount of life left, but my rear ones are really gone, so I figured I would just replace them all at the same time. And then do the inside one as well. And this one's a bit more worn. We just want to inspect these and just sort of see how they're wearing to make sure that everything is sort of wearing as it should. And then the bracket here is going to be held on by two 15 millimeter bolts on the rear here. And again, sort of the same thing. You just want to get your, you can get your wrench on there like this, and then you can use your mallet to put some extra leverage through it. A trick that works pretty well, actually, is what you can do is you can sort of put your open end like this, and then if you put another wrench on top of it, like this, you can actually get a little extra leverage on it. And so that's a trick for these tighter bolts. But if it's really on there, you may want to resort to the mallet. Okay. And then just go ahead and repeat on the bottom one. Okay, so now we can just go ahead and loosen these off. One and two, and there we go. Okay, and now our brake rotor should just remove pretty easily. If it's stuck on there, again, the mallet is your friend. Just give it a few taps. If you live in the Rust Belt, it's not going to be this easy. I'm really sorry, but it's part of the reason why it's so expensive to live in California. And there we go. Okay, so now we can go ahead and grab our new rotor. And before we install it, we want to make sure that we clean off any sort of manufacturing grease that might be on the rotor itself. Oftentimes they'll kind of lightly grease it to make sure it doesn't rust when it's, just sitting on the shelves. And so what we're gonna need is some brake cleaner. So we're just gonna take some brake cleaner, spray it on the braking surface especially, wipe it down. And then we'll flip it over and repeat on the second side. Okay, all right, and now we're just gonna go ahead, place our new rotor on the hub like that. And now we can just secure it with the bracket, which we just took off. Now, there's gonna be some brake hardware on here. You can remove it later or remove it now. It's a little bit easier if you remove it now, so these just pop off. You'll get new ones with your new brake pads. And if you have the time, it's also a really good idea just to give everything a nice little clean. So, some brake cleaner, you can even get this in a, like a parts washer and get it looking real nice. Just like this. Look at that. It really doesn't take that much. This was like 3 minutes in my garage sink. So you can make this look pretty nice with very minimal effort, actually. Okay, so this now gets mounted back on to here, like so. Okay. And these 15 millimeter bolts that came off, these are gonna require a little bit of red Loctite just to be safe. Just like that. And then we can thread these into here. Okay, and now we're gonna go ahead and we need to torque down these two 15 bolts to 52 foot-pounds, which is quite a little bit, so put some muscle into it. 1 and 2. And now we can go ahead and replace our brake pads with our new ones. And so the first thing you want to do is you're going to want to install the new brake pad hardware right here, and then you can go and install your new brake pads. Now, some videos instruct you to put anti-seize right here. You could do that, but if you live in a pretty dry environment, it's probably honestly better not to. Anti-seize is really meant to just be on, like a bolt that's torqued into one place and stays there. You don't want to put it on moving parts because they can gunk up over time. You rather would use grease for that, but you don't want to necessarily grease here because it's so close to the rotor. You don't want to get grease on there. So you could put a little bit of anti-seize just on the back here, to hold these clips and prevent them from seizing up. But honestly, I've never had a clip seize up on me, so I'm not going to put any anti-seize on here, especially because I live in a dry climate where you're not going to have to worry about rust. If you live in a climate with rust, you may want to put a little bit on here, but I'm not going to. So these just clip on like this. And then, again, you're gonna go ahead and grab your new brake pads and install them. Now, some people, again, like to put a little bit of anti-seize back here, and some people like to grease the ears right here to keep them kind of moving freely here. Again, the factories usually don't put any grease or anything on here, so it's kind of up to you. You could put a little bit of brake parts grease just on the ears here, but again, I've never really needed to put anything on the back, but your mileage may vary. So I'm just gonna slide these on. You wanna be really careful not to touch the actual braking surface. You don't wanna get anything greasy, including the grease or oils from your hands on there. And the other goes back here. Okay. And then the thing we do wanna grease, however, are these caliper slide pins. So these just pop out. As you can see here, it's got some grease on there, a little bit old and gunky. And so what we wanna do is clean off the old grease, get that all off there, and then we'll take our brake parts lubricant and we're just going to get these nice and greased up. So a little bit like that, spread it around, and then you can just go ahead and pop it back into the boot, like so. And then repeat on the bottom one. Okay, so the last thing we need to do before we can put this all back together is we need to retract the piston inside the caliper here. So let's go ahead and undo our clothes hanger. So as you can see here, the piston is pushed out because, you know, over time as the brake pad wears, it kind of self-adjusts. So we need to push this back into the caliper to make space for the new pads, which are thicker. So to do that, we're going to take our disc pad spreader, and then we're just going to grab one of our old brake pads. And the brake pad just goes up against the piston like so. And then this guy is going to push the old brake pad to push the piston back into the caliper. So we just need to wind this back down a little bit, slide this guy in there. And then as we start turning, if you look here, you will see the piston retract into the caliper. And we just want to go until it bottoms out. And now that I feel some resistance, I'm done. So I'm just going to loosen this guy up, remove our brake pad, remove this guy, and we are good to go. And now we can just go ahead and slide this over the brake pads. And then we just need to reinstall the two 13s that hold this on to the bracket, and those are going to get some blue Loctite. And then these guys get torqued down to 21 foot-pounds. So dial that into your torque wrench, and then go ahead and torque these down. And then while you still have everything like this, you know, if you notice any grease on there, just give it a little spray of brake cleaner. Get this as clean as you can before you put everything back together. And now we can go ahead and put our wheel back on, and we're done. And then you're just going to go ahead and lift the car back up in order to remove your jack stands, get the jack stands out of there, and drop the car back down to the ground so we can go ahead and torque down the lug nuts properly. Now, the setting, there's a couple different settings I've seen online. I always go to 100 foot-pounds, which seems to work just fine for me. So torque them down in a sort of star pattern to 100 foot-pounds, and you're good to go. Okay, so we are basically all done. The last thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and take the car out for a spin, and we need to bed in the brake pads. Now, really all that entails is sort of basically marrying the new brake pads to the rotors, sort of getting them to know each other a little bit before we do any full power stops. What happens if you don't do a bedding in process is essentially you're not going to have full braking power, and what's likely to happen is you're going to be driving to work the next day, Nissan Altima is going to cut you off, and you know the rest of that story. So good idea is to bed in the brake pads properly. There's plenty of guides online, but essentially all you need to do is just sort of drive at 40 to 60 miles an hour, and then slowly bring the car back down to 10, 15, 20 miles an hour, and do that a few different times until the brake pads are all bedded in. Find yourself a nice stretch of road with not a lot of cars. You can do that a few times, and you should be good to go. All right, thank you guys for watching the video. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was useful. Catch you guys on the next one. See you later.